The janitor's first night. Dan Mercer had never stepped foot in a building so polished, so gleaming, so intimidating. The motion sensor glass doors of Shaw Financial Tower slid open with a whisper, and fluorescent lights spilled onto the sidewalk like a sterile promise. He adjusted the strap of his small duffel bag and stepped inside, boots scuffed but back straight. The lobby smelled like expensive glass cleaner and corporate ambition. Marble floors stretched endlessly toward towering pillars, and a giant silver SF logo hung like a judge's gavel above the reception desk. Dan approached quietly, his footsteps muffled by the hush of late evening. Janitorial team uses the service elevator, the night receptionist said without looking up from her computer screen. Dan nodded politely and followed her gesture toward a narrow hallway. The man who'd interviewed him last week hadn't mentioned much, just night shifts, basic cleaning, decent pay, no benefits. That was fine. Dan wasn't here for a career. He was here for Lily. Always for Lily. Upstairs, the office floors were eerily silent. Computer monitors glowed blue in the darkness, and empty cubicles sat like little monuments to daily stress. Dan found his assigned locker, slipped into his gray janitor's uniform, and got to work. By 9:30 p.m., he'd cleaned 2 floors, restocked supply closets, and was heading toward the executive level when he heard it, the faint sound of someone crying. Through the frosted glass of conference room C, Dan saw a hunched figure alone at a massive table. A young man, barely out of college by his appearance, sat with his hands covering his face. Papers were scattered across the table, and a shattered coffee mug lay near the edge. Dan hesitated. This wasn't his business. He was just the janitor. But then Lily's voice echoed in his memory, "Daddy, you said if someone looks lost, we help. Even if they don't ask." He tapped lightly on the glass. The intern looked up, embarrassed and red-eyed. "Yeah." "Hey," Dan said gently, cracking the door open. "You all right?" The kid wiped his nose quickly. "Yeah, I screwed up, that's all." Dan stepped inside slowly. "Looks like a rough night." The boy gave a broken laugh. "I'm supposed to present this deck to the senior partners tomorrow. Spent 3 weeks on it. The formatting's off, the numbers don't add up, and my supervisor basically told me I might have blown my shot at a full-time position." Dan glanced at the laptop screen. He didn't know much about finance, but he could recognize stress and desperation. "Mind if I take a look?" The intern looked startled but nodded. Dan sat down and scanned the slides. Misaligned graphs, poor contrast, a date error on slide 7. "Looks like most of it's solid," he said. "You just need some cleanup. You've got the right numbers in your notes here." For the next 15 minutes, they worked together in comfortable silence. Dan corrected the formatting while the intern recalculated totals. The tension in the room gradually dissolved. When they finished, Dan stood and erased the whiteboard, wiped crumbs from the table, and picked up the broken mug. Before leaving, he pulled a sticky note from his pocket and scribbled something. He stuck it to the edge of the intern's monitor. "Don't forget this," he said quietly, then disappeared back into the hallway. The note read, "You're not your mistakes. Try again. D." Dan had no idea that 34 floors above, in a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows, someone was about to notice what he'd done. Someone who would change everything. The CEO's curiosity. Evelyn Shaw hated mornings, but she hated incompetence more. By 6:45 a.m., she was seated in conference room C, skimming through the intern presentations her assistant had printed. Her manicured fingers paused on one report. The formatting was crisp, the data tracked perfectly, the projections solid. She frowned. Yesterday, this same presentation had been a disaster. She remembered snapping at the intern in front of half the floor, watching him crumble under her icy critique. Then she saw it, a yellow sticky note left on the monitor beside the laptop dock, "You're not your mistakes. Try again. D." No company letterhead, no official signature. Just that simple message in handwriting that looked strong and sure. Evelyn stared at the note for a long moment. She pressed her intercom button. Get me surveillance footage from last night. Conference room C, between 9 p.m. and midnight. Any specific reason, Ms. Shaw? Just curious. Meanwhile, Dan stepped out of the service elevator onto the ground floor just as Lily burst through the front doors, clutching her library book and a paper bag lunch. "Hi, Daddy," she said, jumping into his arms. "Hey, Button," he whispered, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Ready for our pancake morning?" She nodded enthusiastically. As they walked hand in hand toward the exit, neither noticed the woman watching them from the executive window above, her coffee forgotten in her hand. The surveillance footage confirmed what Evelyn half expected and half hoped. A man in a janitor's uniform had entered the conference room, spoken briefly with the intern, then quietly helped before disappearing into the shadows of the hallway. She paused the footage and zoomed in. The man's face was weathered but kind, his movements calm and deliberate. There had been a little girl waiting for him in the lobby, the same child who politely declined candy from the receptionist, saying, "Thank you, but Daddy says sugar before sleep is a trap." It wasn't just the note that intrigued Evelyn. It was the quiet confidence of someone who didn't need to be noticed but chose to help anyway. That disturbed her. She wasn't used to being curious about people. Not anymore. Later that morning, Evelyn's staff meeting began with tension when the head of facilities, Mr. Brenner, detailed his cost-cutting proposals. "The night cleaning staff is mostly replaceable," he said dismissively. "Low visibility, minimal ROI." Evelyn's eyebrow arched slightly. "What's the name of the janitor assigned to the 34th floor last night?" Brenner blinked in confusion. "I believe that's Daniel Mercer. He was actually on my list for reverse any cuts to his position. Effective immediately." The room fell silent. Brenner looked stunned. "May I ask why?" Evelyn's gaze could have frozen fire. "You may not." After dismissing the meeting, she returned to her office and opened her laptop. It took less than 2 minutes to find an article dated 7 years ago. Local engineer awarded U.S. patent for heat-efficient engine modification. Daniel Mercer of Altus Automotive, credited with innovative design leadership. Then, nothing. He'd vanished from the professional world. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled. This was no ordinary janitor. That evening, she made a decision that surprised even herself. She would meet this Daniel Mercer face to face. An unexpected meeting. Dan had barely finished dusting the main conference table when his earpiece crackled to life. "Mr. Mercer," came the smooth voice of the front desk. "Ms. Shaw would like to see you in her office." Dan paused, cloth in hand. The CEO wanted to see him. He glanced toward Lily, who was reading peacefully in the lobby below, then straightened his shoulders. He'd faced enough hard turns in life not to flinch at one more. He knocked twice on Evelyn's office door before stepping inside. She was behind her massive desk, reading something in a folder, her dark hair pulled back in a perfect chignon. "I wanted to thank you," she said without looking up, "for what you did last night." "I didn't do anything out of line," Dan replied evenly. "Just helped someone who looked like he needed it." That's exactly what was out of line. Finally, she looked up. Her eyes were pale blue, sharp as winter sky. "Around here, people tend not to do that." A pause stretched between them, filled only by the distant hum of the city beyond her floor-to-ceiling windows. "I reviewed your file," she continued. "It's vague." Dan's mouth quirked in a soft smile. "I didn't expect the CEO to go through it." Evelyn didn't smile back, but her tone softened just a fraction. "I value initiative, discretion, competence. You seem to have all three. But I'm not used to kindness being part of the package. I don't think the world needs more people pretending kindness is a liability," Dan said simply. That made something flicker across Evelyn's face, almost like a smile trying to happen. "I won't keep you," she said. "Just, keep doing what you're doing." Dan nodded once and turned to leave. "Oh," she added, her voice suddenly softer. "Tell your daughter I liked her book choice. I read that one when I was 10. Dan stopped, surprised. How did she know about Lily's book? "I'll let her know." After he left, Evelyn didn't return to her reports. Instead, she stood at her window, looking down at the lobby where the little girl waited. For the first time in years, the Ice Queen wondered what it might feel like to be warm again. Over the following weeks, their paths began to cross more often. Evelyn found herself staying late, not for work but for the chance glimpses of the quiet man who moved through her building like a guardian angel. She watched him help a young lawyer with a sprained ankle, saw him replace broken equipment without being asked, noticed how he always had a kind word for the security guards. And Lily, bright, articulate Lily, had somehow charmed the entire night staff. She'd set up a little reading corner in the lobby, and employees would often stop to ask about her latest book. One evening, Evelyn surprised herself by taking the elevator down to the main floor instead of heading straight to the parking garage. She found Dan restocking supplies in the wellness room. "Working late again," she observed. He glanced up. "The quiet's where things get done." "Your daughter," Evelyn said carefully. "She seems remarkably well adjusted for someone whose father works nights." Dan's expression grew tender. "Lily's stronger than she looks. We take care of each other. Her mother died when Lily was 3. Cancer." His voice was steady, but Evelyn caught the flash of old pain. "It's been just us since then." For a moment, Evelyn's carefully constructed walls wavered. "I'm sorry." "Thank you. But we're doing all right. Better than all right, actually." Looking at him, this man who'd lost everything and still found ways to help others, Evelyn felt something crack open inside her chest. Something that had been frozen for a very long time. "Would you?" She began, then stopped. What was she doing? "Would you and Lily like to have dinner sometime? I mean, nothing formal. Just. I'd like to get to know you both better." Dan studied her face, seeing past the CEO mask to something vulnerable underneath. "I think Lily would like that very much." "And you?" For the first time since they'd met, Dan smiled, really smiled. "I think I would too." Hearts begin to heal. The small Italian restaurant Evelyn chose was nothing like the high-end establishments where she usually conducted business dinners. It was warm, family-owned, with checkered tablecloths and the kind of casual atmosphere that made people speak in normal voices instead of corporate whispers. Lily arrived wearing her best dress, a blue one with tiny flowers that Dan had found at a thrift store, and carrying her current book. Evelyn had traded her usual power suit for dark jeans and a soft sweater, looking younger and more approachable than Dan had ever seen her. "Ms. Shaw." Lily beamed. "Daddy told me you read Island of the Blue Dolphins when you were my age. Did you like the part where Karana makes the cormorant skirt?" Evelyn's eyes lit up, a genuine response that caught Dan off guard. "I loved that part. Though I always wondered how she managed to waterproof it." "Right? I tried to figure that out too. Maybe she used tree sap." As the evening progressed, Dan watched something remarkable happen. The ice-cold CEO melted away, replaced by a woman who remembered what it felt like to wonder, to laugh, to engage with the world beyond profit margins and board meetings. "Your father tells me you want to be an engineer," Evelyn said as they shared dessert. Lily nodded enthusiastically. "Like Daddy used to be. He's really smart, even though he cleans floors now." "Even though?" Evelyn glanced at Dan. "There's no shame in honest work, sweetheart. Your father is one of the most capable people I've ever met." Dan felt something warm settle in his chest. When was the last time someone had defended him? Believed in him? After dinner, as they walked through the nearby park, Lily skipped ahead to feed ducks at the pond. Dan and Evelyn found themselves alone on a bench, watching the little girl's joy with quiet contentment. "She's remarkable," Evelyn said softly. "She saved my life," Dan replied. "After Sarah died, I didn't know how to keep going. But Lily needed me, so I learned." "What happened to your engineering career?" Dan was quiet for a long moment. "Sarah's medical bills. I sold everything, mortgaged everything, borrowed against everything. When she died, I had nothing left except debt and a 3-year-old who needed stability. Janitorial work was the first job I could find that paid enough and had the right hours." "You gave up your dreams for her." "No," Dan said firmly. "I chose new dreams. Better ones." Evelyn studied his profile in the lamplight. She'd spent her entire adult life climbing corporate ladders, accumulating power and wealth, but she'd never felt as rich as this man who'd lost everything material yet still radiated contentment. "I've been alone for a long time," she admitted quietly. "By choice, mostly. I convinced myself that connections were weaknesses, that caring about people would make me vulnerable. And now?" She turned to look at him directly. "Now I think maybe I was just scared." Their first kiss happened 3 weeks later, on another late evening when Evelyn had found an excuse to linger in the building. Dan was finishing his rounds when she appeared in the hallway, not in her usual corporate armor but in yoga clothes, her hair loose around her shoulders. "Couldn't sleep," she said simply. "Want some company?" They ended up in the executive break room, sharing tea and conversation that meandered from Lily's latest school project to Dan's memories of Sarah to Evelyn's admission that she'd built Shaw Financial into an empire partly to prove she didn't need anyone. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd met years ago?" she asked. Dan considered this. "We wouldn't have been ready for each other. I needed to learn how to be a father first. You needed to learn that being strong doesn't mean being alone." When he reached over to brush a strand of hair from her face, she didn't pull away. When she leaned into his touch, he didn't hesitate to meet her halfway. The kiss was soft, tentative, full of questions neither of them had words for. But in that moment, surrounded by the quiet of the sleeping building, two broken people began to believe in the possibility of being whole again. By the time they pulled apart, both knew their lives were about to change in ways that had nothing to do with corporate hierarchies or class differences. They were simply a man and woman who'd found something precious in the most unexpected place, each other. A new beginning. 6 months later, the Shaw Financial Tower looked exactly the same from the outside, gleaming glass reaching toward the sky, marble lobby echoing with the click of expensive shoes. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. Dan no longer worked the night shift. After weeks of Evelyn's careful maneuvering, he'd been offered a position in the company's facilities management division, overseeing building operations and staff welfare. It was work that utilized both his engineering background and his natural ability to connect with people. "You're wasted as a janitor," Evelyn had told him one evening. "But you'd never be wasted as someone who makes sure everyone else can do their best work." The transition hadn't been without challenges. Some employees whispered about favoritism, about the cleaning man who'd somehow charmed his way into the executive's heart. But Dan's competence quickly silenced most critics, and his genuine care for the staff won over the rest. Lily, now a regular fixture in the building's after-school program that Evelyn had quietly funded, had become something of a mascot for the entire floor. She'd help with filing, chat with executives about their problems, and somehow make everyone's day a little brighter just by being herself. "She's got your heart," Evelyn told Dan one afternoon as they watched Lily explain her science project to fascinated accountants, "but she's got a business mind too. I might have to steal her for the internship program in a few years." Dan laughed. "Good luck with that. She's already talking about MIT." The real test came during the annual board meeting, when several members questioned the new, employee wellness initiatives that Evelyn had been implementing, many of them inspired by watching Dan work. "These programs are expensive," complained board member Harrison. "Free childcare, mental health support, educational assistance, where's the ROI?" Evelyn stood at the head of the conference table, every inch the powerful CEO, but with something warmer in her eyes than there had been before. The return on investment is simple, she said. Happy employees work harder, stay longer, and care more about outcomes. Our productivity is up 12%, turnover is down 30%, and client satisfaction scores are at an all-time high. You can measure kindness, gentlemen. It just takes looking at the right metrics. After the meeting, Dan found her in her office, looking out at the city lights. "Rough day?" he asked. "Good day, actually. I used to think showing weakness would destroy everything I'd built. But it turns out showing humanity only makes you stronger." He moved behind her chair, placing gentle hands on her shoulders. "Any regrets?" Evelyn leaned back against him, feeling the solid warmth of the man who taught her what it meant to be truly powerful, not through fear or money, but through connection and care. "Only one," she said softly. "What's that?" "That it took me so long to realize that the strongest thing you can do is let people see who you really are." A year later, Lily walked down the aisle of a small church, scattering rose petals and grinning at everyone in the pews. She wore a white dress with tiny flowers, her hair crowned with baby's breath, looking every inch the happy flower girl. Dan stood at the altar in a simple black suit, his eyes never leaving Evelyn as she walked toward him. She wore an elegant ivory dress that was nothing like the power suits she'd once lived in, her hair loose around her shoulders, her smile radiant with joy. As they exchanged vows, promising to honor each other's strength and shelter each other's vulnerabilities, the small congregation, made up of friends from the building, Lily's teachers, and a few of Evelyn's family members, wiped away tears. "I promise to love your daughter as my own," Evelyn whispered during the ring exchange. "I promise to love your ambition as much as your heart," Dan replied. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, their kiss was witnessed by the most unlikely wedding party, former janitors and current executives, night shift workers and board members, all united in celebrating a love that had grown from the simplest soil, one person choosing to help another. At the reception, Lily made a toast that brought down the house. "My daddy always said that how you do small things shows who you really are in big things. He did small things with so much love that he won the biggest thing of all, a new mom for me and a new life for all of us." Later that evening, as Dan and Evelyn danced to their first song as husband and wife, she whispered in his ear, "You know what the best part of all this is?" "What?" "I used to think I had to choose between being successful and being happy. You taught me I could have both." Dan spun her gently, then pulled her close. "You taught me something too." "What's that?" "That sometimes the best dreams are the ones you never knew you wanted." As the music played and their friends and family celebrated around them, Dan Mercer, former engineer, former janitor, current husband and father, held his wife close and marveled at how a single act of kindness on a quiet night had led to this moment of perfect joy. Outside the Shaw Financial Tower, the city hummed with its usual energy. Inside the building, a small plaque had been installed near the employee break room. It read, "How you do small things is how you honor big ones." Below it, in smaller letters, "In memory of Sarah Mercer, and in celebration of the love that connects us all." Lily had suggested it, Evelyn had commissioned it, and Dan had cried when he first saw it. But more than anything, it served as a daily reminder to everyone who passed by that kindness isn't weakness, it's the strongest force in the world, capable of transforming lives, healing hearts, and building bridges between the most unlikely souls. The end.